So in the last video, we talked about the amoeba protozoal pathogens and the ciliated. In this video, we're going to talk about the protozoa pathogens with flagella. And right now I'm going to just tell you the route of transmission or the vector that's used to spread these diseases. And I would write this down right now so you don't forget. So Giardia, which is spread through contaminated food or water, so the fecal to oral route. Trichomonas, which is actually spread via sexual contact. It's one of the top STDs actually in the US. Trypanosoma brucei. This one is spread through a fly called the tsetse fly. Okay, so brucei is spread by the tsetse fly. Trypanosoma cruzi is spread by the ruduviid bug, sometimes also referred as the kissing bug. Okay, another insect vector. Then lastly, we're going to talk about Leishmania. Leishmania species are spread by sand fly. First, let's talk about Trichomonas. So the trichomonads are flagellated protozoa. They're characterized by having 4 flagella. So if you look at them under the microscope, they're almost like a heart shape. The 4 flagella extend out from the top here. Then they have this undulating membrane. It almost looks like the membrane is kind of coming off, like these little folds here. Then at the end, they have this axostyle. That's what they use to basically attach or to latch on to the vaginal wall. It actually can cause pain, especially in females that are infected. The main trichomonas that infects humans is Trichomonas vaginalis. This is one of the top sexually transmitted diseases. Now, what's key about the trichomonas is they do not produce cysts. So there is no cyst. They are always in a trophozoite stage. In males are very likely to be asymptomatic. They're often the carriers. So a male could very well be infected, have no signs or symptoms, and be spreading it. If males do experience symptoms, they may have a discharge, they may have urethritis, and if it progresses long enough, it could actually lead to prostate infection. Females are much more likely to have symptoms. They may experience a foul-smelling discharge, pain with urination, frequent urination, burning, etc. We usually treat with metronidazole, again, that very commonly used protozoal treatment. It's very important that if we treat a female, we also treat the partner, the male. Even if the male is asymptomatic, it's very important to do this to prevent further spread. Typically, females will get diagnosed using a wet mount. We'll collect vaginal fluid sample and we'll conduct a wet mount and look for the Trichomonas protozoa in the sample. The second flagellated protozoa is Giardia intestinalis. It causes a disease called giardiasis. So again, this is a flagellated protozoa. It actually contains flagella almost throughout the entire body. This one is also a pear or a heart-shaped protozoa, and it typically has 2 nuclei. You can see the 2 nuclei. It kind of looks like eyeballs. Now, 50% of people actually are asymptomatic when they get Giardia. Those that do have symptoms will usually experience diarrhea, cramps, flatulence, even malabsorption, meaning they don't absorb nutrients properly from food. So the way that Giardia spreads is that it's actually a natural reservoir in wild animals like beavers and coyotes and even cats. And what happens is the cysts of the Giardia, it does make cysts. The cysts get excreted in the feces of these animals and it gets into the environment, perhaps in maybe some stagnant water like a lake or a puddle. And actually, even your dog could get Giardia, so you never want your dog to drink stagnant water out of a puddle or out of a lake. That's actually dangerous. A lot of times where we see this the most is in hikers. Like someone's out for a hike and they take a drink out of a stream, and the stream has this Giardia cyst. And these cysts can persist in the environment for a long time, like 2 months, so it's actually pretty risky. We also may see this, and again, in those institutional settings, like in daycares where people are sharing sources of water. In order to diagnose Giardia, just like I told you before, we'll usually collect 3 stool samples because It's only intermittently shed in the feces. So if we miss it in the first couple, hopefully we'll see it by the third. And what we're looking for are either the cyst or the trophozoite version of the Giardia. Treatment, again, is that metronidazole that we commonly use for those anaerobic protozoa. Our last group of flagellates belong to a special type of flagellated protozoa called hemoflagellate. Remember, whenever you see heme, you know that's blood. So these flagellates are spread via blood-biting insects that are going to collect a blood meal. We also may see this in blood transfusions. This is one of the reasons why when someone donates blood, they always ask, have you traveled outside the country recently? Because these protozoa can be in the bloodstream and they can spread via contaminated transfusion. And again, these insects that carry hemoflagellates, typically they live in very warm tropical climates. So you may not see them in the New England region, but you may see them in someone who's recently traveled to another area. All of these hemoflagellates have a very complicated life cycle, as you will see. Now, the way we categorize hemoflagellate is by the various infective stages they may or may not have. So they may be in an amastogote stage. This is when they're in a round cellular shape and they're not expressing their flagella. They may also be in the promastogote, epimastogote, or tripomastogote stage. All of these stages, they're motile and they're expressing flagella, but the difference is the insertion site of their flagella. So you can see the flagella differ on where they're located inside the cell. So our first group of the hemoflagellates are the Trypanosoma. This is the genus name, and there's several species of Trypanosoma, and they cause diseases called trypanosomiasis. And there's two diseases that trypanosomes cause. So the first is called Trypanosoma brucei. That's the species name, brucei. It causes a disease called African sleeping sickness. This is the name of the disease. The second species is Trypanosoma cruzi, which causes Chagas disease. This one is more endemic to Central and South America, whereas Trypanosoma brucei is endemic to Africa. So first, let's talk about Trypanosoma brucei, which causes African sleeping sickness. Now, Trypanosoma brucei is always spread by the tsetse fly. Okay, and this fly, again, it's endemic only to Africa. But there has now evolved two different strains, two variants of this Trypanosoma brucei. The first variant is in West Africa. The West African strain is actually the slower to progress strain, so it's kind of less virulent. The East African strain progresses faster, and it's actually a more severe disease. And because these two strains have now evolved to be so genetically different, it is in fact possible that somebody could be infected with both, although hopefully that won't happen. So what happens in this disease is the individual is bitten by the tsetse fly and the protozoa enter into the bloodstream. And again, these protozoa will multiply in the blood. They're hemoflagellates. They like blood. When they spread in the bloodstream, they'll usually travel to a lymph node, or they could also travel to the central nervous system, the brain or the spinal cord. Initially, some signs and symptoms may be a fever, headache, dizziness, and swollen lymph node. But what happens is the fever goes through cycles, and these cycles can last for months, where a person will feel a fever and then it'll go away and then it'll come back. And this is one of the reasons the disease has this name, African sleeping sickness, is because when someone has that high fever, it causes disruptions in their sleep cycle. Eventually, after the period of several months, the disease will actually lead to sleep disturbances like extreme tiredness during the day, slurred speech, difficulty walking, and eventually will lead to paralysis, coma, and death. To diagnose this disease, typically we'll take a blood sample because the protozoa are replicating in the blood. We'll look for them there, perhaps spinal fluid or even in the lymph node. Now, there's really not a lot of effective treatment, especially once the disease has progressed to that neurological stage where the person's feeling neurological symptoms. The best and really only thing we can do is to try to avoid contact with that tsetse fly. Now, the second trypanosome disease is Trypanosoma cruzi, which causes Chagas disease. Now, this one is also known as the American trypanosome because it's endemic to Central and South America. We also may find it in Mexico. There are actually cases that have been found in Texas. Now, this is one of those things where when we see climate change and we start to see warmer and warmer temperatures in the United States, we may see the insect that carries this protozoa start migrating to even more northern regions of the United States. Trypanosoma cruzi is spread by the reduviid bug, also known as the kissing bug. And it has this name because what happens is when the person is sleeping, the bug will usually come right up to their face and bite on the face, and it almost looks like someone's been kissed on the face. So what happens is this bug, it picks up the protozoa from another animal, could be a cat or a wild animal. And then, like I said, when a person is sleeping, the bug comes in, bites them on the face, and now the person is infected. Now, the protozoa is actually found in the feces of the bug. So when the bug bites the human, it causes a little opening where the feces can enter. But also, if somebody eats food that's contaminated with the bug feces, it actually can also enter that way. Initially, the person may feel fever, swelling of lymph nodes, and also they may feel swelling in other lymphatic organs like the spleen or the liver. The most dangerous effect of Trypanosoma cruzi is sometimes it can become chronic, meaning it can last a long time or even lifelong. And when the disease becomes chronic, it actually targets the heart and the central nervous system. So in severe cases, especially very young children, there has been known cases of meningitis due to this. Or in older people, if it gets to the heart, it actually causes abnormal enlargement of the heart and eventually heart failure. Again, to diagnose this disease, we'll usually take a blood sample, look for the protozoa in the blood. Treatment is always better when caught earlier. If it gets to this point, it may be too late to treat. Our last flagellated protozoa is Leishmania. Leishmania is also a hemoflagellate. It causes a disease called leishmaniasis. Now, Leishmania is normally carried by animals like rodents or dogs or fox. And what happens is this insect, this is a sandfly. This is the major vector of Leishmania. Now, the sandfly will bite one of these animals, pick up the protozoa, and then bite a human, so it transfers it from animal to human. This disease is endemic to South and Central America, Africa, and the Middle East. Now, here's the life cycle of Leishmania. So what happens is when the sandfly bites the human, it injects the promastigoid protozoa. These protozoa immediately target a macrophage. Now, macrophage are immune cells. Their job is supposed to be to destroy these pathogens. But what happens is this protozoa can actually start replicating inside of the macrophage. If the macrophage remains localized, then you may see things like a swollen lymph node or a swollen lymphatic organ. But what can become more dangerous is if the macrophage actually becomes systemic, meaning it spreads to the rest of the body. Now, that several people present with a wide range of signs and symptoms from this disease. The least severe is someone may have a single ulcer on the skin, and a lot of times it will just go away without any treatment. Kind of in the middle here is somebody could have multiple of these ulcers throughout the skin and in the mucous membranes. The most severe thing that could happen is if this disease becomes systemic and uncontrolled and actually can lead to deep infections in the spleen, liver, lymph nodes, and also lead to another intermittent fever. And at this stage, it would be very difficult to treat.